Have you ever felt invisible? Like you step into a room and don't recognize anybody, you take a quick survey of the room and recognize that you feel incredibly alone, that nobody would care if you were there or not, and it may make you want to withdraw, to step out, or to feel like you don't belong. Have you ever felt the opposite way? Maybe you felt like the center of attention in a room where you didn't want to be. You walk into the wrong room and people seated around the table all stop and they focus their attention on you, and it becomes incredibly awkward. Maybe you wish you could be invisible at that point. Well, this week, Micah Kephart from Poetis International shared a message with us about this idea of loving who we see. And it was incredibly powerful. It reminded me of a story in the Old Testament. It's the story of Hagar and Abraham and Sarah, and we find her story in Genesis chapter 16. Hagar was largely invisible. She was Sarah's maidservant, which meant that she just existed kind of to make Sarah's life easier. Abraham, you may remember, was promised by God that he would become a great nation, but as life gets along, he and Sarah don't have any children, so they hatch a plan. Sarah goes to Abraham and says, "Hey, why don't you marry my servant Hagar and you can have children through her?" That sounds incredibly awkward to our ears, something that we would never envision happening, but it was actually pretty common in this day and age. So Abraham marries Hagar. She goes from invisible to all of a sudden being the center of attention as she carries Abraham's child that will end up being a son. And Sarah hates her for it. The Bible says that Sarah despises her and she treats her harshly, so harshly that Hagar flees. I want you to see that picture, that Hagar, who was invisible just as Sarah's maidservant, is thrust into center stage where now everybody sees she's under meticulous scrutiny and it's too much for her. She simply can't handle the harsh treatment of Sarah, and so she leaves. Have you ever been there in that situation where you've been thrust from one situation to another and you want to be invisible at times, but you're not happy being invisible either, but you don't want to be the center of the stage? Hagar is pushed back and forth in this game of playing with her life, and she's exasperated, so she leaves. You might say she's at rock bottom. As she flees, she ends up meeting an angel, and God says some things to her that grab her attention. This angel pronounces a blessing over her unborn son and instructs her to go back to Abraham. And in the midst of this statement, in the midst of Hagar's fleeing, in the midst of her inner turmoil, she praises God and she ascribes a word to him that's just so poignant and powerful. She calls God El Rohi, which means the God who sees me. See, Hagar was down and out when this whole story started. She was invisible. Then she got thrust into the center of the stage, which made her feel, for some reason, even more alone, even more isolated, like nobody saw her for who she truly was. She felt trapped. And so this statement of God, of the God who sees me, is a statement of her own recognition that what she really desires more than anything is not to be invisible, and it's not to be the center of attention. It's simply to be seen, to be known, to be acknowledged, to know that the God, this God of Abraham, saw her where she was at in her moment of need and recognized her situation and her story. I think we can draw a couple points of correlation from this story of Hagar. And the first point is that God sees us. God sees us. If you're down and out, invisible, tired of being in the spotlight, tired of the way your life is going, God sees you right where you're at. He sees you and he wants you to know that he loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. God sees you and you aren't invisible to him. Maybe you just need to hear that encouragement today. The second thing we can learn from Hagar's story is this: God calls us to love the people we see. As we are sent by God into his world and for his purposes, he gives us eyes and a heart for the people around us. We can see people as he sees them, encourage them, bless them, let them know that we see them and love them and that there's a God who does the same. So who in your life does God see? Maybe a better question is, who in your life may be unseen by the rest of the world, but God has equipped you to see them? How could you walk alongside them and tell them the story of God's love? Show them this story. God sees us when we're in our times of need, and he sees the people around us as well. Who in your life is unseen and just needs that recognition to not be invisible and to be recognized, to be seen and known, and to be introduced to the God who sees them and knows them.